Well, Theresa May has told MPs that they have a national duty to resolve the Brexit crisis as she defended her decision to accept a further 6-month delay. But some of her own MPs have called on her to resign, accusing her of abject surrender. The UK was due to leave the EU tomorrow, but in the early hours of this morning in Brussels, EU leaders opted for a new deadline of the 31st of October. But the UK could still leave before then if a deal is agreed. If it isn't, the UK will have to take part in European elections at the end of May. If the UK doesn't take part in those, well, Brexit will happen on the 1st of June with no deal in place. This afternoon, the Prime Minister and the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn held more talks on possible areas of agreement. Our political editor Laura Kunsberg has the latest.
The fury isn't so fast anymore. Our EU exit has slowed right down. The Prime Minister didn't get her way, so was back explaining to Parliament today we might not leave the European Union for another 6 months.
Statement, the Prime Minister.
Her hope still to make it happen earlier, but not many in these benches think it can be done.
I deeply regret that we have not yet been able to secure agreement in this House for a deal that would allow us to leave in a smooth and orderly way. I know too that this whole debate is putting members on all sides of the House under immense pressure.
And for Brexit to happen anytime soon, the Prime Minister needs Labour to compromise, but there's still hostility between the two.
The second extension in the space of a fortnight represents not only a diplomatic failure, but it's another milestone in the government's mishandling of the entire Brexit process.
The delay's toxic for some Tories.
Perseverance is a virtue, but sheer obstinacy is not. So, Prime Minister...
Eurosceptics know a thing or two about being stubborn as well.
Does my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, appreciate the anger that her abject surrender last night has generated across the country? Will she resign?
A sharp, collective intake of breath.
I think you know the answer to that.
But as per usual, the Tories are split.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for going up to Brussels, standing up in the national interest and coming back with an extension that means we're going to avoid the car crash and disaster that would have been involved in a hard Brexit.
And a delay means more time for those pushing a radical solution to make their case.
One more heave isn't good enough, and it won't work.
Absolutely right.
Does she acknowledge, even if it's not what she wants, putting her withdrawal agreement to the public is the way to break this Brexit deadlock?
That might be a long time coming, but so is the decision on delay. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning in Brussels that the Prime Minister emerged.
Good morning, everybody.
To justify doing what she'd said she never would.
You said just a few days ago, as Prime Minister, I could not consider a delay further beyond the 30th of June. Except that is exactly what you have agreed here in the early hours. But why should people consider that you are still the person to preside over this?
Well, look, what we have agreed tonight means that we can actually leave the European Union before the 30th of June. What we need is to ensure that we have an agreement in Parliament that we can get through.
It's quite a stretch, though, to imagine this could be wrapped up by the end of June. Theresa May met Jeremy Corbyn again this afternoon, putting energy into trying to find a compromise with Labour. It's a tall order, though, to imagine the two big parties could come together. And without a deal like that, there's no obvious other way through.
The Prime Minister, and maybe you too, wanted all this long gone by now. But nothing about Brexit has happened in haste. And now the speed of this whole process is still slowing down. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So how are people reacting to the decision to delay Brexit again? Our correspondent Judith Moritz has been to Knowsley in Merseyside to talk to voters and business owners there.
What do I think about Brexit and the latest extension? Further agony for the country.
All the people don't know what's going on. In fact, the politicians don't even know what's going on.
Because I think me, like the rest of the country, is absolutely fed up.
After all them extensions, it became one big comedy for now.
They just need to all get together and basically decide what they want to do.
If you think the worlds of cushions and politics are far apart, think again. The staff at this soft furnishings factory might have had enough Brexit, but their boss welcomes the extension.
I just hope that the withdrawal agreement that the Prime Minister's put forward actually passes, because it's good for our business, because we do a lot of business with the United States, which will give us the opportunity to get a trade deal. And we also do a lot of business with the EU, where we buy a lot of our fabrics from.
Brexit is bothering both ends of the business spectrum here. Jaguar Land Rover's plant nearby has stopped production this week, blaming uncertainties over it. And the smallest businesses tell me they're feeling the effects too. Businesses like this tattoo parlour, whose owner says he's had his worst ever winter's trading.
A lot of my customers over the last 2 years have lost their jobs.
And that's Brexit, you think?
I think so.
And what about if we now have European elections amidst all this?
Well, I personally, and I presume the general public, haven't got a clue about the workings of the European Union. With European elections, we don't know how that works.
The MP here used to be Harold Wilson. He was Prime Minister during the 1975 referendum when Britain voted to remain. So how do locals think Brexit will play out?
Well, in 6 months we'll get another 6 months, won't we?
I think it'll go on and on.
Yeah, until we have another vote.
We need a new leader that believes in Brexit, that can take the country forward.
There's a European election. I am going to vote because livelihoods are at stake.
How will you predict Brexit is going to end?
A general election, and people have never been more politicised in the history of working class folk.
Judith Moritz, BBC News, Knowsley.
Now, less than 12 hours after she'd been told the European Union would agree a Brexit date extension, the Prime Minister was back in the Commons explaining the new October deadline. She said she never wanted to ask for an extension. MPs now had a national duty to agree a deal, she said. If tired MPs felt in any way grateful for a Brexit breather, many were not showing it. Some on her own side said she should resign, and Labour called the delay a diplomatic failure.
Westminster's only just emerging from winter, but it could be entering another one by the time Brexit's in full bloom. Tonight, as Parliament escapes for Easter, there will be no exodus from the EU.
Statement, the Prime Minister.
Theresa May having to explain earlier why our departure's delayed again, this time as late as October.
Mr Speaker, I know the whole country is intensely frustrated that this process to leave the European Union has not still been completed. I never wanted to seek this extension, and I deeply regret that we have not yet been able to secure agreement in this House. I believe we must now press on at pace with our efforts to reach a consensus on a deal that is in the national interest.
In other words, she'll use the time to strike a deal with him.
The second extension in the space of a fortnight represents not only a diplomatic failure, but it's another milestone in the government's mishandling of the entire Brexit process. We must continue to talk to each other, and if the government is serious, the red lines must move.
But this House still wants them to move in many different directions.
Start leading by listening, Prime Minister, and please get her head out of the sand.
She speaks about compromise, but she still has refused or is unable to tell the House what is her compromise.
Perseverance is a virtue, but sheer obstinacy is not. So, Prime Minister...
Hear, hear. The joke's that nobody's been harder to move than him, except perhaps the Prime Minister, who they are now once again seriously trying to budge.
Will she resign?
I think you know the answer to that.
She had suggested it was yes if Brexit was delayed beyond June, and after her trip to Brussels, it could well be, as EU leaders went round Britain's arguments for a short extension and in the early hours insisted on a longer one, with the option to leave early. A 6-month delay creates all kinds of possibilities. Theresa May could resign, allowing a new Prime Minister to negotiate a different deal. Though a general election would be the only way to change the numbers in Parliament. But with the Conservatives loath to risk that, there'll be more calls for a second referendum instead. Or perhaps more time just allows for more disagreement about the best option.
Her deal's not going through, she therefore must leave, and somebody, frankly, of a Brexiteer orientation must come and lead the party and take forward a new deal.
It's still pretty tight timing for a second referendum, isn't it? I mean, the government would have to pretty much declare one today.
It's tight timing for everything, but I think, look, the previous strategy wasn't working. So if what we carry on doing is the old strategy that wasn't working, in this new time, we will not be using the time wisely.
But tonight, Theresa May hasn't yet given up on her own plan. Before everyone left here today, she met privately with Jeremy Corbyn to continue talks to find a compromise. For now, though, the only thing agreed is that MPs pause this debate till after Easter. Paul Brand, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, when he announced the October deadline overnight, the head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, urged British politicians not to waste the extra time. But if EU leaders were hoping the new deadline would create some new thinking, there was no sign of that in the first UK delegation to hold talks in Brussels today.
The arrival in Brussels this morning of the DUP's Arlene Foster and 2 hardline Conservative Brexiters may have disappointed those in Brussels who hope Britain will use the extra 6 months for a reset to find a new approach. Because what they heard was a familiar refrain, a demand for changes that no one here believes will ever be delivered.
In the House of Commons, the only motion that got through with a majority was the motion to deal with the backstop, and therefore we believe that she needs to look at that again, and she should come out here very strongly and say the backstop is the issue, so let's deal with it.
Okay. This is exactly what France's Emmanuel Macron feared might happen, and why, to the irritation of most other leaders, he kept them talking till 2 a.m. Unconvinced the UK had any new ideas, he wanted to keep the pressure on and the extension short. As he made it clear, the future of the EU was really his only priority.
We delivered the best possible compromise, first because it was the one to preserve the unity of the 27, second because we addressed the request from the UK to get more time to deliver a deal on the basis of the withdrawal agreement.
In contrast, Angela Merkel's attempts to accommodate Theresa May went much further than simply enjoying the fact they'd turned up in matching outfits. Britain is a friend, she told the meeting, and you always give a friend another chance, and another, and another. She remained conciliatory at her post-summit press conference. I think that in order to give greater leeway and room to the British decision-making process, she said, the decision we've taken today is a good one.
In some respects, it was the EU27 who blinked last night. 3 weeks ago, they had insisted that a long extension would require a whole new approach from Britain. No one could really claim there's been one, and yet they gave the extra time anyway.
Those who fought hardest on Britain's behalf urged London now to take full advantage.
This extension is as flexible as I expected and a little bit shorter than I expected, but it's still enough to find the best possible solution. Please do not waste this time.
And although there is nothing to say, the new deadline of October the 31st can't be extended again. After the struggle to get this deal last night, the feeling here is that Britain had better not bank on getting another one. James Mays, News at 10, Brussels.
So Robert joins me now. So a temporary breather for some, but there are talks still ongoing with Labour.
Yes, that's exactly.
And a shift in position.
Well, that's my view. One of the things I was very struck by last night when interviewing John McDonnell on my show was he volunteered that a so-called confirmatory referendum that would be putting to the British people in another referendum any deal that the House of Commons approves would be one way of making sure that as and when Theresa May goes, and most people think that won't be that many weeks away, a successor wouldn't be able to rip up a deal with Labour. Now, just to be clear, the talks between ministers and Labour aren't going desperately well. But the significance for me was the fact that I didn't have to sort of push him to talk about the referendum. He volunteered it. So I then today talked to a number of other senior Labour figures, and it is clear to me that Jeremy Corbyn and the Shadow Cabinet are moving towards turning their current position on the referendum, which is that it's an option, into pretty much their first choice Brexit policy. And it's not just because there are lots of backbench MPs and Labour members and Labour supporters who want that are sort of driving the Shadow Cabinet in that direction. It is also those looming European elections, because all the signs are that if Labour were to become effectively the referendum party, they would clean up in those elections. They would emerge as far and away the biggest party in the European Parliament, and they would get a lot of momentum going into what they think may happen, even perhaps later this year, which is a general election.
But there will be a pause, a bit of a breather for some of the MPs at least, and perhaps for you too, Robert.
Oh, gosh, I hope so. And the Tory MPs, of course, are all away wondering whether to plot and unseat Theresa May any minute now.
OK, Robert, a moment. Thank you.